shock ripped through Windsor Castle this morning when a 70-year-old black belt, ex-royal guard, shattered tradition with one brutal punch. Under the heavy gray skies, Edgar Wallace, bald, his thick gray goatee sharp against his stern face. Once a proud soldier of Her Majesty's elite forces, now a black belt master hardened by decades of real combat, swung a devastating punch into the face of young guard Thomas Whitmore, only 24. Gasps broke the stillness. Yet, little did anyone know it wasn't Edgar's fist that would truly shake Windsor to its core that day. If honor and hidden battles move you, subscribe now for true stories revealing the heart behind Britain's proudest traditions. The courtyard fell into a stunned silence. For a moment, even the fluttering Union Jacks above Windsor Castle seemed to pause, as if holding their breath. Edgar Wallace, shoulders square beneath his battered tweed coat, cracked his knuckles with slow, deliberate menace. His pale blue eyes that had once stared down enemies in far-off lands, now locked onto Thomas Whitmore, standing rigid in his scarlet tunic, his youthful face a mask of duty. Yet, beneath the crisp uniform, a flicker of uncertainty danced. The crowd, frozen mid-gasp, sensed the storm building. Edgar circled slowly, his worn boots scraping against the ancient cobblestones, each step echoing like a drumbeat of impending doom. His every movement radiated a lifetime of battle-hardened precision. No wasted motion, no unnecessary flair. He wasn't here for spectacle. He was here to prove a point, one forged in blood, sweat, and long-forgotten promises. Whitmore, to his credit, held his ground. His jaw tightened, fingers twitching ever so slightly at his sides. The tension between the old warrior and the young sentinel crackled in the cool morning air, a living current that made the hairs on the back of every neck stand on end. Then, without warning, Edgar moved. A blur of coiled fury, he launched himself forward, unleashing a devastating spinning kick aimed straight at the young guard's chest. The crowd gasped as tradition, pride, and raw instinct collided in one heart-stopping instant. But what happened next, no soul in Windsor could have foreseen. For a heartbeat, it seemed the world itself had stilled. Edgar's boot, worn yet deadly, hurtled towards the center of young Whitmore's chest with the force of a battering ram. Yet, in a flash that defied every expectation, the young guard moved. With a grace that belied his rigid stance moments before, Whitmore sidestepped, pivoting sharply on his heel, the heavy soles of his boots scraping against the stones. A collective gasp burst from the crowd. Edgar, mid-strike, felt the emptiness where solid impact should have been. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something far more dangerous: respect. Whitmore didn't falter. With a soldier's instinct honed in secret, away from public gaze, he seized the opening. His gloved hand snapped out, catching Edgar's arm mid-swing with a precision that spoke of ruthless training, not mere ceremony. The old fighter staggered, just half a step, but it was enough to send ripples of shock through the courtyard. The pensioners at the back clutched their coats tighter. Mothers pulled children closer. Tourists forgot their cameras, their fingers frozen halfway to the shutter. And then, Whitmore did the unthinkable. Breaking every expectation of deference and stillness, he dropped into a low, combat-ready stance, a posture no casual observer could mistake for mere parade ground formality. His voice, calm yet carrying like a rifle shot, cut through the heavy air. "Respect, sir, must be earned." Before Edgar, or the world, could react, Whitmore moved again, faster than any believed possible. For a heartbeat, it seemed the world itself had stilled. Edgar's boot, worn yet deadly, hurtled towards the center of young Whitmore's chest with the force of a battering ram. Yet, in a flash that defied every expectation, the young guard moved. With a grace that belied his rigid stance moments before, Whitmore sidestepped, pivoting sharply on his heel, the heavy soles of his boots scraping against the stones. A collective gasp burst from the crowd. Edgar, mid-strike, felt the emptiness where solid impact should have been. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something far more dangerous: respect. Whitmore didn't falter. With a soldier's instinct honed in secret, away from public gaze, he seized the opening. His gloved hand snapped out, catching Edgar's arm mid-swing with a precision that spoke of ruthless training, not mere ceremony. The old fighter staggered, just half a step, but it was enough to send ripples of shock through the courtyard. The pensioners at the back clutched their coats tighter. Mothers pulled children closer. Tourists forgot their cameras, their fingers frozen halfway to the shutter. And then, Whitmore did the unthinkable. Breaking every expectation of deference and stillness, he dropped into a low, combat-ready stance, a posture no casual observer could mistake for mere parade ground formality. His voice, calm yet carrying like a rifle shot, cut through the heavy air. "Respect, sir, must be earned." Before Edgar, or the world, could react, Whitmore moved again, faster than any believed possible. For a heartbeat, Edgar wavered, caught between muscle memory and the dawning realization that he was no longer the most dangerous man in the ring. Whitmore moved again, not with the heavy, mechanical motions one might expect from a soldier, but with a quiet, predatory grace, the kind earned through years of unseen training. The cobblestones beneath them bore witness as Edgar, summoning every scrap of battered pride, steadied himself. He could feel the eyes of the crowd, some willing him on, others silently pleading for him to yield. But Edgar Wallace had never been one to step away from a fight, not even when the odds loomed as they did now. With a roar that seemed to tear from the depths of his history, Edgar lunged. His fists, still powerful though slower than in his prime, drove forward in a flurry of strikes, seeking some crack, some human hesitation in Whitmore's defense. Yet Whitmore was calm, terrifyingly calm. He slipped between the punches with chilling economy, reading Edgar's movements as though they were written in bold ink. Each miss drove Edgar closer to the realization that strength alone would not win today. Then, without warning, Whitmore countered. A lightning-fast elbow strike to Edgar's side, followed by a swift, crushing sweep to the legs. The old fighter crashed onto the cold stones with a grunt that silenced the courtyard. Above him, Whitmore stood tall, but it was what he did next that stunned everyone beyond words. For a long, charged moment, Edgar lay still, the breath knocked from his lungs, his pride bruised even deeper. The stone beneath him felt cold, unforgiving, much like the truth settling over his battered frame. Around the courtyard, the crowd held its collective breath, suspended between disbelief and awe. Even the whisper of the autumn breeze seemed to hush, unwilling to break the tension crackling in the air. Slowly, painfully, Edgar pushed himself up onto one elbow, his chest heaving, eyes narrowed against the sting of failure. Above him, Whitmore remained motionless, not gloating, not triumphant, simply resolute. His young face was carved from stone, every line screaming discipline, respect, and a quiet, unbreakable power. "You've still got fight in you," Whitmore said, his voice low yet clear, carrying easily across the hushed courtyard. "But some battles aren't meant to be won with fists alone." The words, simple as they were, struck Edgar harder than any blow. They came not as mockery, but as a lesson, a bridge between two generations of warriors, both forged by service but separated by pride. Edgar's fists, once clenched in defiance, slowly loosened, and just as the tension seemed ready to dissolve, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the courtyard. "Stand down, both of you." A line of ceremonial guards, suddenly alive and moving with military precision, surged forward, boots hammering the stones, rifles in hand. And what happened next would leave Windsor reeling for days. The thunder of boots grew louder, reverberating off the ancient courtyard walls, a rhythmic, disciplined march that sent shivers down every spine. Edgar, still half kneeling, instinctively braced himself, old instincts screaming that reinforcements meant trouble. But Whitmore didn't flinch. He stood firm, hands loosely at his sides, as if daring the storm to break around him. The line of guards, their scarlet tunics blazing against the gray stone, split with military precision. From their ranks emerged a towering figure, a senior officer, silver-haired, eyes like sharpened steel beneath the gleam of his ceremonial helmet. His voice, when it came again, brooked no argument. "Enough!" The crowd scattered back, giving the scene the reverence of a battlefield rather than a tourist attraction. Even the children fell silent, sensing the gravity in the air. Whitmore straightened, spine stiff with discipline, while Edgar, heart-hammering, forced himself upright. His joints protested, his pride even more so, but he rose nonetheless, a soldier to the very last. The officer's gaze swept between them, weighing, judging, understanding more than words could say. For one terrifying moment, Edgar thought he might be arrested on the spot. But then, something unexpected happened. The officer lifted a hand, not in reprimand, but in salute, directed at Edgar Wallace himself. The old fighter froze, breath catching painfully in his chest. A salute from the Queen's own. Yet just as Edgar's mind reeled, the officer turned his eyes sharply to Whitmore and said, "You're needed inside." Urgently. And that was when true chaos erupted. Whitmore didn't hesitate. At the officer's command, he pivoted smartly on his heel and sprinted towards the castle's inner gates, his every movement sharpened by urgency. The crowd, sensing the sudden shift from ceremony to crisis, parted instinctively, the air thick with questions left unspoken. Edgar stood motionless, his chest rising and falling heavily, every fiber of his battered frame screaming to follow. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. You didn't pull a Queen's Guard from post unless the situation was critical. The senior officer's face, usually a mask of stoic detachment, betrayed the faintest shadow of concern. His eyes flickered briefly to Edgar, an unspoken understanding passing between two men who knew the smell of danger all too well. Inside the ancient walls, alarm bells began to toll, not the ceremonial chimes of state pageantry, but the harsh metallic clang reserved for emergencies. A low murmur rippled through the spectators, fear gnawing at the edges of their curiosity. Then, in the distance, a sharp cracking sound echoed, unmistakable, chilling. Gunfire. The officer barked rapid orders, his voice slicing through the growing panic. Guards surged forward, forming protective barriers around the entrances, their rifles now more than just ornamental props. Without thinking, Edgar moved too, his old instincts overriding battered bones. His fists clenched, not from anger, but readiness. Somewhere deep inside the castle, something far deadlier than a simple duel was unfolding, and Edgar Wallace, God help him, was about to be dragged into it. The courtyard exploded into controlled chaos. Guards barked clipped commands, civilians were hurried towards exits by steely-eyed officers, and the once picturesque setting became a hive of urgency. Edgar's heart thundered against his ribs, each beat a harsh reminder that something far graver than bruised pride was unfolding beyond those ancient stone walls. He caught a glimpse of Whitmore vanishing through an inner archway, moving with the sure-footedness of a man who knew exactly what awaited him, and was running towards it, not away. Edgar clenched his jaw. Whatever was happening inside, it wasn't a training drill. This was real. Another crack of gunfire, sharper this time, cut through the air like a whip. A woman screamed. Somewhere, a radio crackled urgently. Soldiers began forming layers of defense, their bayonets gleaming under the muted daylight. The senior officer, eyes sweeping the courtyard with a predator's focus, locked briefly onto Edgar. For a fleeting moment, it seemed he might call him forward, summon the old fighter into service once more. But instead, he merely gave a tight nod, a silent acknowledgment between men who had both seen too much. Then, without warning, the castle gates slammed shut with a deafening clang, sealing off the inner courtyard. And from somewhere deep within Windsor's ancient heart, a shadow moved, swift, purposeful, and armed. The real threat had just begun to reveal itself, and no ceremony, no tradition, would be enough to stop it now. Inside the thick stone walls, the corridors twisted like a labyrinth, every echo magnified into a roar by the castle's ancient bones. Whitmore moved swiftly, every nerve tuned to the danger ahead, while behind him, the muffled panic of the courtyard faded into a heavy, oppressive silence. Edgar pressed forward too, weaving through the scattering guards and bewildered officials. His breathing was labored, but determination lent speed to his aging frame. Somewhere ahead, something sinister lurked, a threat not merely to tradition, but to lives. As he turned a corner, he caught sight of Whitmore again, crouched low behind a marble pillar, his rifle raised with professional ease. A shadow flitted across the grand hallway beyond, tall, lean, and unmistakably armed. For a moment, time seemed to stretch taut, each second a painful pull against the nerves. Edgar's fists clenched instinctively. He had no rifle, no body armor, just the instincts of a lifetime spent surviving when the odds turned bloody. Whitmore glanced back, their eyes locking across the distance. No words passed, none were needed. In that look was an understanding, a passing of trust from the young to the old. Then the intruder stepped into full view, not a common criminal nor a reckless attacker, but a man in full tactical black, armed with an automatic weapon and a device strapped tight to his chest, blinking a furious red. Windsor Castle wasn't facing a simple assault. It was facing an impending disaster. For a fleeting second, neither Edgar nor Whitmore moved. Every muscle, every instinct, screamed at them to act. Yet the cold discipline of real combat froze them in place, calculating. The man with the blinking device on his chest turned slowly, scanning the hall with dead, empty eyes. He carried himself with the certainty of one already resigned to his fate. Whitmore's fingers tensed on the trigger. Edgar's fists flexed at his sides. They both knew, one wrong move, one mistimed strike, and Windsor's ancient heart would be ripped apart in a roar of fire and stone. The device blinked faster. Whitmore shifted, adjusting his stance, steady as bedrock. Edgar, breathing in shallow bursts, recalled his old training, how to judge distance, how to close the gap, how to move before fear could take root. His mind raced, weighing the impossible, disarm a man with nothing to lose, without sparking catastrophe. A bead of sweat trickled down Whitmore's brow, unseen beneath the rigid line of his jaw. The intruder stepped forward, and Edgar, drawing upon every ounce of battered strength, made his decision. With a sudden explosive burst, he hurled a loose piece of stone, chipped from centuries of footsteps, straight at the bomber's face. The man flinched, just an instant, but it was enough. Whitmore moved like lightning, closing the gap in a flash of scarlet and steel. Yet as he struck, another figure lunged from the shadows behind them, unseen, until it was far, far too late. True strength is not measured by the noise one makes or the pride one displays, but by the calm resilience hidden beneath the surface. Edgar and Whitmore's clash reminds us that real mastery, in life, in duty, in character, often comes from humility, discipline, and quiet preparation, not showmanship. In a world that rewards appearances, we must remember that what truly matters often lies unseen. The patience to wait, the wisdom to act only when needed, and the courage to stand firm when everything else falters. As we grow older, it is tempting to cling to past glories. Yet true dignity comes from recognizing when to pass the torch and when to stand ready, if called. Real greatness is not declared loudly. It reveals itself in moments of crisis, where character, not reputation, defines the outcome.